Amy had always believed that the heart of Heartland would beat forever, no matter what life threw their way. But as time passed, the ranch started to feel emptier, quieter. The place that once echoed with love, laughter, and memories now seemed like a shadow of its former self. And with Ty gone, Amy couldn't help but wonder, would she ever be whole again? Now, after years of silence, a familiar face appears, pulling Amy back into the past, stirring emotions she's tried to bury. Can she face the truth of what's been left unsaid? And more importantly, can she let go of the one person she never truly said goodbye to? The sun sets over Heartland, casting a warm, golden hue over the ranch. But the peaceful scene feels strangely lonely. Amy stands outside the barn, her hands absently stroking the familiar wood of the stable door. Every part of this place, every corner of Heartland, reminds her of Ty. Her heart aches as she watches the sun dip lower, the same way she's watched so many days slip by without him. Time had passed since Ty left, but it still felt like yesterday. The memories of the life they once built together remained fresh, even as the world around her continued to move on. The ranch had changed, and so had Amy. She could still hear Ty's laughter in the wind and feel his presence in the soft rustle of the trees. The years they spent together were filled with joy, challenges, and a love that shaped her in ways she could never fully explain. But life had a way of moving forward, whether she was ready or not. And as much as she wanted to keep Ty's memory alive, Amy knew that deep down she had to face the truth. She was living in the past. It was something she didn't want to accept, but the emptiness in her heart told her otherwise. The ranch wasn't the same without him, and neither was she. Amy shook her head, pushing away the thoughts that had been clouding her mind for months. She couldn't keep dwelling on what was lost. She had to keep going, for the ranch, for her family, for herself. But no matter how hard she tried to move forward, there was always a part of her that stayed frozen in time, holding on to the past that had slipped through her fingers. Just as she turned to go inside, she heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel road. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years, but it was unmistakable. Someone was here, someone who had been a part of her life, her past. She didn't need to see them to know who it was. The familiar feeling of anticipation and fear washed over her in an instant. Nathan. Her mind raced. Why was he here? After all this time, after everything that had happened, why would Nathan return now? Amy stood still, her breath catching in her chest. She could feel the weight of the years between them, the awkwardness of the silence that had stretched for so long. But before she could gather her thoughts, Nathan stepped out of the car and began walking toward her. His face was older, wearier, but still carrying the same haunted look she remembered. The tension between them was thick, like the air before a storm. Amy felt herself holding her breath, unsure of what to say, unsure if she even wanted to know what he had to say. The past was dangerous territory, and she wasn't sure she was ready to open that door again. Yet here he was, standing in front of her, as if time had never passed. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Neither of them spoke. Nathan just stood there, his hands at his sides, his gaze locked on Amy. It was like he was waiting for her to say something, to break the silence. And then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, Amy spoke the one question that had been haunting her for so long. "Why are you here, Nathan?" Her words hung in the air, a mixture of curiosity and guarded fear. The years had made her stronger, but that didn't mean she was ready to confront the past she had buried deep inside. Yet somehow, she knew this moment was unavoidable. The sudden return. Nathan's arrival. The quiet of the ranch felt almost oppressive now. Each passing second, heavy with the unsaid words between them. Amy stood frozen for a moment, her gaze fixed on Nathan, who was still standing just a few feet away. His presence here, after so many years, stirred something deep inside her, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The ranch had never felt as still as it did in that moment. Nathan hesitated for a brief second before taking another step forward. His eyes, tired and full of regret, locked onto hers. Amy's heart was racing, but she didn't move. She couldn't. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing him again. It was what he represented. He was a piece of her past, a past that she had long tried to move on from. Yet, there he was, standing in front of her as if the years had meant nothing. Nathan opened his mouth as if he were about to speak, but then paused, his words caught somewhere between the past and the present. "Amy," he began, his voice lower. Then she remembered, almost fragile. "I didn't know where else to go. I needed to see you." His words felt like an anchor, pulling her back to a place she'd tried to escape from. Amy instinctively took a small step back, her eyes narrowing slightly. "See me?" she echoed, the confusion evident in her voice. "You just show up, after all this time? And you need to see me?" Nathan looked down at his boots, a moment of shame passing over his face. He was clearly struggling with something he hadn't told her. Amy could feel the tension rise between them, like an invisible wall. She wanted answers. She needed answers. But she didn't want to open the door to a past that still made her heart ache. Yet a part of her knew that no matter how much she wished otherwise, this moment had arrived, and there was no turning back now. "I know this probably isn't the best time," Nathan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But there's something I need to tell you, something I've been carrying around for a long time." Amy's breath hitched in her chest. Her mind raced. She had so many questions. Why now? What could he possibly say that could change anything after all this time? Her fingers tightened around the edge of the barn door, seeking some kind of support, as if the structure could hold her steady against the storm of emotions that was beginning to brew inside her. "You've been gone for years, Nathan," Amy said, her voice quieter, now tinged with hurt. "You walked away and I never meant to hurt you," Nathan cut her off, his voice cracking with sincerity. "I never meant to leave you like that. I thought about you every day, but I made some mistakes, and I've been carrying that guilt around for too long. I need you to know that it wasn't your fault." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, and Amy felt a knot form in her stomach. There was something more to his return, something deeper than just a casual visit. She could sense it. His eyes flickered with vulnerability, and she could tell this wasn't just about him needing to explain himself. There was more at play here. And even though Amy was afraid of what he might say next, she couldn't deny the pull of her curiosity. She crossed her arms, her stance defensive yet open. "What are you really here for, Nathan?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying the weight of years of unresolved feelings. "After everything, why now? What are you trying to fix?" Nathan took a deep breath, his hand rubbing the back of his neck as if searching for the right words. "I know I don't deserve to ask this of you, Amy, but—" He paused, the words choking him. "I have something from Ty, something I think you need to hear." The mention of Ty hit Amy like a wave crashing against the shore. She felt her heart race, her pulse quicken. Ty. Her mind instantly went to the memories of him, their life together, the way he had always been her anchor. What could Nathan possibly have that involved Ty? And why hadn't Ty come to her with this himself? "Ty," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathan nodded, his eyes filled with both pain and understanding. "I know this is hard to believe, but there's a message from him. Something he wanted you to know, Amy. Something Important. Amy's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to step back, to push Nathan away, to tell him this was too much to handle, but she couldn't. Not when he mentioned Ty. Not when the possibility of hearing from Ty, even in some indirect way, was within her grasp. Her heart ached, and for a moment she was frozen. The years of longing, of not knowing, suddenly seemed like they were closing in on her. "Why didn't Ty tell me this himself?" she asked, her voice trembling, even though she tried to keep it steady. Nathan's expression softened with regret. "Ty, he didn't get the chance, and I didn't know how to tell you, but I think it's time for you to hear the truth." Amy swallowed hard, feeling a flood of emotions she had buried for so long rise to the surface. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. Nathan took a step closer, his presence almost overwhelming now. "Amy, Ty left you something, and it's something that might change everything for you, for both of us." The air seemed to stand still as Amy's heart pounded in her chest. The truth. She had always wondered if she would ever get closure. And now, standing in front of her, Nathan was offering a piece of it. Something that could finally bring her the answers she had been searching for all these years. But at what cost? Was she ready to hear what Ty had left behind? "I love you. Always will." Amy's breath caught in her throat as the words burned into her soul. She had imagined hearing those words from Ty for years, but seeing them now, in his handwriting, felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't enough. She had always needed more than that. She needed the explanation, the reason for his absence, the closure she had spent so much time chasing. But here it was, only a few words, so simple, so final. But then, as she looked down, she saw the second item that had fallen out of the envelope. It was a small, weathered key. A key to something, somewhere. Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. "There's more, Amy. Ty wanted you to have this key. It's for a place you both used to go. He thought you'd find peace there." Amy's mind raced. A place they both used to go? What did that mean? The key, so small and simple, felt like a puzzle she had to solve. Why had Ty left this behind for her? What was he trying to tell her now, when he was no longer here to explain it himself? Her hands shook as she held both the paper and the key. The words, "I love you," rang in her ears, but they felt like a mere whisper compared to everything else she was feeling. And the key. It was like an invitation to something she couldn't quite grasp. "What is this, Nathan?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "I don't know," he admitted softly. "But Ty trusted you to figure it out." Amy stared at the key in her palm, her mind swirling with confusion and 1,000 emotions. She had spent so long trying to understand Ty's departure, trying to find peace with his absence. But now, with this key in her hand, everything felt like it was about to change again. Would she find the answers she had been searching for, or would this just lead her down another path of heartache? Either way, she knew one thing for certain. This was not the end. This was just the beginning, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The evening air felt unusually heavy as Amy stood there, the key in one hand and the crumpled note in the other, her mind in turmoil. The golden hues of the setting sun seemed to mock her, casting long shadows across the land that had once been a place of peace, a place where she could always rely on clarity. But today, clarity was nowhere to be found. Everything had changed, and yet nothing felt certain. The key, Ty's final gift, had unlocked something inside her. It was as if she had been standing at the edge of a cliff for so long, too afraid to take the next step. But now, with this small, heavy object in her hand, she felt the ground beneath her shift. The path ahead was uncertain, a shadowy unknown that felt both like a promise and a threat. Ty had loved her, that much was clear. But could she still love him the way she had before? Could she open her heart to the man who had walked away without warning, without explanation, leaving her with nothing but silence and memories? She hadn't realized how deeply she'd been holding on to the past until now, until this moment when everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and letting go was being tested. How could she move on from the man she still loved? How could she accept that he might never return, that the piece of her heart she had given him might be lost forever? Amy sank slowly to the edge of the porch, the wood creaking under her weight, her fingers gripping the key tightly as if it were the only thing tethering her to the present. The note she still held in her other hand fluttered slightly in the wind, the words scrawled across it like a whisper from the past. "I love you. Always will." The words echoed in her mind, louder now, as if Ty himself were standing there beside her, begging her to understand, to feel the weight of the love he had tried to convey even in his absence. But the truth was, she wasn't sure she could carry the weight of it all anymore. The last few years had been hard enough. She had learned to navigate life without him, to find strength in the quiet moments of her days. She had poured herself into the ranch, into the work that kept her busy and distracted. But now, with Nathan's words echoing in her mind, with the promise of something more from Ty, the walls she had so carefully built around her heart were beginning to crumble. The idea of closure, the thought that Ty might have left something behind for her, was both a comfort and a burden. What if the key led her to something that could heal her? What if it led her back to a piece of her past that was better left behind? She didn't know if she was ready to open that door again, especially not when her heart felt so fragile. As her eyes wandered across the ranch, Amy thought about everything she had built since Ty left. She had kept the ranch going. She had kept fighting for her family, for the animals, for the land. But somewhere along the way, she had also kept fighting herself, fighting the pain of loss, fighting the longing that gnawed at her when the nights were too quiet, when the loneliness crept in like a dark cloud. She had convinced herself she could be okay without him, that she could move on, live without the one person who had always been her anchor. But now, standing at this crossroads, the reality was staring her in the face. Could she really let go of him? Could she accept that her life was meant to be something different, something without Ty in it? The questions were suffocating. They crowded around her, each one demanding an answer she wasn't sure she could give. She loved him. She always would. But was love enough to bring him back? Was love enough to erase the pain of his absence? In that moment, Amy felt a deep sense of vulnerability wash over her. It was as if the universe had stripped away every protective layer she had built around herself, leaving her raw, exposed, and uncertain. It was terrifying. But as much as she hated it, she knew this was the moment she had to face. The moment when she could no longer hide from the truth. With a deep, shuddering breath, Amy stood up. The weight of the key in her hand felt even heavier now, but somehow it was grounding her. She wasn't ready to face whatever came next, but she had no choice. She had to take that first step into the unknown. She had spent so long trying to hold on to the past, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Ty would come back to her. But the truth was, she had to start living for herself again. She couldn't keep waiting for a future that might never come. The wind picked up again, the cool air brushing against her skin as she looked out across the ranch. Her heart felt heavy with the burden of the choices ahead of her. She didn't know what the key would unlock, or if it would lead her to the peace she had been searching for. But what she did know was this: she couldn't keep waiting for Ty. She had to find a way to move forward, even if it meant saying goodbye to the dream of them. The dream of a life they had once imagined together. With one last lingering look at the ranch, the place that had always been home, Amy took a step toward the unknown, her heart still aching but now more open to the possibility of healing. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing. It was time to let go. It was time to find her own way, to build a future that didn't rely on the shadows of the past. The love she had for Ty would always be a part of her, but she was ready to honor it and him by moving forward. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but it was the only way she could truly heal. Emotional flashbacks. Ty's impact. The ranch was quieter now, the faint hum of evening insects the only sound that filled the air. Nathan's words hung between them like an unspoken promise, but Amy couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her mind raced, thoughts tumbling over one another as the mention of Ty hit her harder than she could have expected. It had been so long, but the memories of him were still sharp, etched deeply in her soul. As if on cue, her mind began to drift back in time, to moments she thought she had locked away. The sound of Ty's laugh echoed in her ears, a warm, carefree sound that had once filled her heart with peace. They had built so much together, and even in their darkest times, they had always found a way back to each other, until the day he left. Amy's gaze softened as she stepped away from Nathan, her eyes clouding with the memories. The barn, the fields, the land. Everything reminded her of him. It was like she could still feel him here, beside her, helping, her with the horses or standing by the fence, talking about their future. But that future had been ripped away in an instant, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone. A flash of their first real conversation resurfaced in her mind. They were standing in the kitchen, Ty with his warm hands on the counter, the sunlight filtering through the window. "I'm not going anywhere, Amy," Ty had said, his eyes filled with quiet assurance. "Not as long as you'll have me." She could almost feel the weight of those words again. Ty's promises had been more than just words. They had been her anchor. In a world that sometimes felt out of control, he had been there for her through thick and thin, even when it seemed like everything else was falling apart. He was her safe place, her rock. But now, standing in front of Nathan, that sense of security felt like a distant memory. Ty's absence had left a void that no one, not even the ranch, could fill. Amy had tried to move forward, to make peace, with the fact that Ty was gone. But she had never truly let go. Her thoughts shifted again, this time to the last night she saw him, the night he had left. She remembered standing by the door, the pain in her chest as she watched him walk away. "I'll come back to you," Ty had promised, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes searching hers for reassurance. But she hadn't been able to give it. She had known, deep down, that something was different. Something had changed. The moment he left, a part of her had gone with him. And now, here she was, all these years later, standing with Nathan, caught between the past and the present. As she stood there, her fingers gripping the wood of the barn, Amy closed her eyes, fighting back the rush of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "I couldn't keep waiting for him," she whispered to herself. But the truth was, she had never stopped. Not really. Nathan's voice broke through her thoughts. "I know this is hard, Amy, but Ty wanted you to know he never stopped thinking about you, never stopped loving you." Amy's eyes snapped open, her heart skipping a beat. Her mind had been working overtime, trying to make sense of the last few years of Ty's sudden departure and the quiet emptiness that had followed. And now, hearing Nathan's words, something inside her cracked open. Ty had loved her. That much was clear. But was it enough to bring him back? Was it enough to erase the pain of his absence? The questions burned in Amy's mind, each one more impossible to answer than the last. Nathan continued, his voice steady but laced with sorrow. "Ty He couldn't say goodbye, Amy. Not like this. He didn't want to leave you with all these questions, all this uncertainty. But he had to go. And he knew you needed to hear this. Amy felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to shout at Nathan for bringing up Ty again, for reopening the wound she had worked so hard to heal. But all she could do was stand there, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of his words. "What are you trying to say, Nathan?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What exactly did Ty leave for me to hear?" Nathan hesitated before answering, his expression softening, as if he was weighing the gravity of his next words. "There's something he wrote for you, something that might give you the closure you've been needing all this time, something important." Amy's pulse quickened. Could it be? Could there really be something Ty had left behind? A message? A letter? Had he known that? Even after all these years, she still hadn't found the peace she so desperately sought? "Where is it?" Amy's voice was barely above a whisper, but the urgency in her tone was unmistakable. Nathan's eyes darkened with a mixture of sadness and guilt. "I'm not sure it's going to be what you expect, but it's what he wanted. It's the truth." Amy's heart raced in her chest. Truth. The word hung in the air like a beacon of hope, yet also like a heavy weight ready to pull her under. She had spent so long living with the absence of Ty, trying to piece together the fragments of their love. But now, the truth, the one thing she had never gotten from him, was within her reach. Amy closed her eyes for a moment, collecting herself. She wasn't ready to face this. She wasn't ready to confront the emotions she had buried for so long. But deep down, she knew she had no choice. This was the moment she had been waiting for without even realizing it. This was the chance to finally say goodbye. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm swirling inside her. "Show me what he left." Nathan nodded solemnly, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding she hadn't expected. As he reached into his jacket pocket, Amy's heart pounded, and she realized this was the beginning of a new chapter. But whether it would bring closure or open a new set of wounds, she didn't know. The silence between them was suffocating. Amy's pulse quickened, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched Nathan carefully pull out a small, weathered envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was old, the edges slightly worn, as if it had been handled countless times. There was no name written on the front, nothing that identified who it was for, but Amy already knew. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the object, her mind racing. Nathan didn't immediately hand it to her. Instead, he held it out between them, his gaze meeting hers with a deep sorrow. "I know this isn't going to be easy for you," he said quietly, his voice betraying the weight of the secret he'd been carrying all these years. "But I think it's time you understood everything." Amy's hand instinctively reached out for the envelope, but she hesitated. Was this truly what she had been waiting for all this time? The closure she so desperately needed? Or was it just another cruel twist of fate, another piece of tie she could never quite grasp? Nathan watched her closely, his eyes filled with guilt and regret. "You need to know, Amy," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Ty didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because he thought he had no choice. There's something in here that he wanted to explain, something he never had the chance to say." The world around Amy seemed to blur as she looked down at the envelope. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, the unknown, waiting just beyond her reach. There were so many questions, the kind of questions she had kept buried for so long, but had never been able to answer. Why had Ty left? Why hadn't he come back? And why had Nathan, of all people, come to her now with this fragile piece of the past? "Ty was always trying to protect you, Amy," Nathan added, his voice thick with emotion. "He thought that leaving was the only way to keep you safe, but I don't think he ever fully understood how much it hurt you, how much it hurt both of you." Amy's throat tightened as his words hit her like a physical blow. She had always known that Ty's decision to leave wasn't simple, but hearing Nathan speak about it, about Ty's intentions and the pain he carried, made the memories of their last moments together even more unbearable. Was that why he had never said goodbye properly? Because he thought it would hurt her too much? Amy slowly took the envelope from Nathan, the weight of it heavier than she had anticipated. It felt like the entire history of their love, their struggles, their separation was contained in that small piece of paper. The longing she had felt for so long, the unanswered questions, all seemed to swirl around her as she held the envelope in her hands. For a moment, she simply stood there, frozen, trying to summon the strength to open it. The thought of finally hearing Ty's words, of finally understanding what had happened between them, was almost too much to bear. She was afraid of what she might learn, afraid that the truth would be more painful than the unanswered silence she had lived with. Nathan seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to open it now," he said softly. "But I think you deserve to know what he wanted you to hear, what he couldn't say before." Amy felt the heat of the sun on her face as she stood in the fading light, surrounded by the memories of the life she had once known. It felt like the entire world had stopped in that moment, waiting for her decision. Would she open it? Would she finally face the truth that had haunted her all these years? Slowly, carefully, Amy peeled open the envelope. As the paper slid out, she felt her breath catch in her throat once more. It wasn't a letter, as she had expected. Instead, it was a small, folded piece of paper, and something else, something more unexpected, fell out along with it. Amy's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. On the page were only a few short words, handwritten in Ty's familiar script, and yet they felt as